No one expected what was about to happen when Byron Donalds tried to humiliate Jasmine Crockett live on national television, but they had no idea what was coming next. Right before we jump into this wild story, tell us, where are you watching? From you might be surprised how far this reaches. It was the final segment of a fiery primetime panel on Capitol Roundtable, a live-streamed political showdown watched by millions. The studio was sleek, modern, and humming with tension. LED spotlights bounced off polished floors, and a split screen of fiery clips from recent congressional sessions rolled behind the moderators. The audience was packed with staffers, students, and reporters, all eyes fixed on the stage. Phones were already out, streaming every second to TikTok and X, seated across from each other. Two figures glared through the cameras with years of ideological tension crackling between them. On one side, Jasmine Crockett, the fierce congresswoman from Texas, known for her sharp intellect and unrelenting voice for justice. A former civil rights attorney raised in the Deep South, Jasmine wasn't just here to argue, she was here to defend the truth. She had faced down prosecutors, pundits, and policy wolves. And tonight, she was fighting for every young girl who had been told they were too emotional or too loud to lead. Across from her sat Byron Donalds, the confident, camera-ready congressman from Florida, a smooth speaker, polished debater, and darling of conservative circles. Charismatic and armed with talking points, Byron had made a name by clashing with progressive voices, and tonight he was itching to add Jasmine's name to that list. The issue? Historical literacy and education, and who gets to shape how America's story is told. But beneath the policy jargon lay something more dangerous: pride, identity, and the fight to define what it means to lead in today's divided country. And the moment Jasmine opened her mouth, the entire room shifted. The moment the segment officially opened, Byron Donalds leaned into his microphone with the cool detachment of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. "Well, let's get one thing straight," he said, flashing a condescending smile. "We're not here to rewrite history with emotion. We're here to teach facts. But it seems like Congresswoman Crockett would rather teach feelings and victimhood than facts and accountability." A few soft chuckles echoed from the audience. Some of Byron's supporters nodded in agreement. The moderator gave a tight smile and gestured for Jasmine to respond, but Byron wasn't finished. "I mean, Jasmine, can I call you Jasmine? You've been in Congress, what, a year? And suddenly you're the authority on the entire legacy of American history?" He gestured broadly to the audience, smirking. "I mean, sure, you've got a law degree and a few years in the courtroom, but that doesn't exactly make you an expert on curriculum development or macroeconomics." Gasps flickered across the room. Phones rose, recording. The trap was clear. Paint Jasmine as inexperienced, emotional, and out of her depth. But Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned forward slowly, eyes locked on Byron, the calm in her voice cutting, like a razor through the smugness in his tone. "Actually, Byron, it's Congresswoman Crockett to you," she said, not smiling. "And while you're busy counting the number of months I've been in Congress, let me remind you, I spent over a decade defending people your policies left behind." The audience murmured. "Now, I know you like to throw around this whole facts over feelings thing, because it plays well in sound bites. But let's talk facts, shall we?" She turned to face the crowd, her tone steady. "Fact. In multiple states across this country, bills are being introduced that would ban the teaching of systemic racism in schools. That isn't about protecting children, that's about protecting power." Byron shifted in his chair. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but Jasmine held up a hand without even looking at him. "Fact. The curriculum you defend, the one that sanitizes slavery, erases Reconstruction, and glosses over Jim Crow, isn't just inaccurate, it's dishonest. And worst of all, it robs our children of the tools to make this country better than it was yesterday." Now the murmurs were growing louder, nods from college students in the front row, quiet mms from a pair of older black women in the second row. Byron tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on," he said, shifting gears. "You're acting like any critique of curriculum is some grand conspiracy. All I'm saying is, kids shouldn't be taught to hate their country." Jasmine cocked her head slightly, like a mother listening to a child explain away a broken vase. "No one is teaching them to hate America, Byron. We're trying to teach them to understand it, fully, honestly, even when it's ugly, because patriotism without truth is propaganda. Applause broke out. Byron's eyes narrowed, just slightly. He hadn't expected her to take control so quickly, or so calmly. And since you brought up qualifications, Jasmine continued, still cool and precise, let me ask you something. How many history degrees do you hold? Byron blinked. That's not... Because I've read your public statements. I've seen you reference the Constitution while voting for bills that violate it. I've watched you invoke Martin Luther King Jr. while voting against voting rights. Gasps. See, Byron, she said, sitting back. Maybe you're not upset because I lack experience. Maybe you're upset because I don't lack the backbone to call you out. Byron opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The camera cut to the audience. A young man near the back was shaking his head in disbelief, whispering to the woman beside him. Someone else in the second row tapped furiously on their phone. Jasmine Crockett is eating on live TV. Donald's destroyed. Back at the desk, Byron finally composed himself and gave a dismissive chuckle. You're very rehearsed. I'll give you that. Jasmine smiled slightly. No, Byron, I'm just prepared. There's a difference. Laughter, applause. Even the moderator raised her eyebrows. But Jasmine wasn't done. And one more fact, just for the record, she said, voice sharpening. When people in power try to belittle others with sarcasm and fake charm, it's usually because they're afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of being exposed, afraid of what happens when the truth finally drowns out the spin. She folded her hands neatly in front of her, eyes never leaving Byron. And tonight, that fear, it's showing. The applause was louder now, and even some of the audience members who'd laughed at Byron's earlier digs were looking at him with uncertainty. He tugged slightly at his collar, mouth twitching as if unsure whether to speak or smirk. But that was just the beginning. Byron Donalds leaned back in his chair, face tight but clearly rattled. The controlled smirk from earlier had melted into something more pointed, more personal. Oh, you want to talk about fear? He said, laughing dryly. All right, let's talk about what people should be afraid of. Politicians who play identity games while pretending to be revolutionaries. He turned directly toward Jasmine, dropping the pretense of civility. You stand up here acting like some crusader for truth, but let's be real, Congresswoman. You're part of the elite now. Ivy League-adjacent law degree, national spotlight, cable news darling. And yet you stand here claiming to represent the forgotten, when you haven't lived like them in years. The room tensed. A few heads tilted. Some murmurs broke out. One camera caught a man in the audience mouthing, "Did he just go there?" Byron pressed on, seeing an opening. It's performative, Jasmine. You know it. Your district is struggling, your schools are failing, and instead of fixing things, you fly to DC and lecture the rest of us on moral high ground. What have you really done, besides go viral for shouting in hearings? Jasmine didn't respond right away. The silence hung sharp and deliberate. Then, without looking away, she slowly reached for a single piece of paper sitting beside her. First of all, she began, voice firm and slow. I didn't come from the elite. I came from Dallas, South Oak Cliff. My mother cleaned houses. My father worked night shifts. So don't you dare question whether I know what struggle feels like. The audience snapped to attention. And yes, I earned a law degree. Not from privilege, from grit. I defended kids who couldn't afford bail, parents evicted for being $10 short on rent. I walked into courtrooms where prosecutors looked at my clients like statistics, and I fought like hell to make sure they weren't. She unfolded the paper. This is a letter from a 17-year-old named Maya. From my district. Her father was deported. Her brother was incarcerated. She says the only reason she still believes in this country is because she watched someone like me make it out and come back to fight for people like her. Byron opened his mouth but paused. Jasmine's voice dipped low and deadly calm. You don't get to erase that with a cheap line about being elite. Because I didn't leave my people behind, Byron. I brought them with me. In every policy I fight for. Every hearing I step into. Every time someone tries to silence them, I make sure my mic is on. The audience was dead silent. Even the moderator stared wide-eyed. And let's be really honest, she added, now rising from her seat slightly. You talk about failing schools, but you vote against the funding that keeps their lights on. You talk about broken homes, but you stand with policies that separate families. You talk about crime, but you refuse to fund community programs that prevent it. Gasps scattered through the room like firecrackers. One woman in the front row clutched her chest. A young man shook his head and whispered, "She's cutting him up like surgery." And let's not forget, Jasmine continued, her voice gaining power, that just last month you called slavery a necessary evil to the founding of this country, on national television. Boos erupted from the audience. Byron's eyes widened slightly. "I read the transcript," Jasmine said, sliding the paper toward the moderator. "You didn't stumble. You defended it. You tried to make it sound intellectual. But what it really was insulting, not just to me, but to every descendant of someone who was sold, whipped, and shackled for profit." Byron sat frozen. "And no amount of smug spin will ever wash that stench away," she said, sitting down again with a calm exhale. "You wanted a lecture? You just got one." The moderator turned, eyes scanning the now buzzing room. Audience members whispered frantically. Some stood, clapping. A woman in a Howard University sweatshirt shouted, "Tell him, Crockett!" Phones were up everywhere. Twitter hashtags were being born in real time. Elite, where Ni, Crockett, vs. Donalds. Necessary evil? Even Byron's own corner of supporters looked shaken. One staffer leaned over and whispered something to a man in a navy suit, who glanced nervously toward the cameras. Byron blinked slowly and tried to recover. But Jasmine, for the first time, smiled, just a little, because she knew it. The tide had turned. But the next move from Byron Donalds would be their biggest mistake yet. Byron Donalds leaned forward this time, a glint of renewed confidence flashing in his eyes. His voice lowered into something rehearsed, sharp, like a prosecutor who had just caught the witness in a contradiction. "All right, Congresswoman," he said with a crooked grin. "Let's put your claims to the test. You talk a good game about funding and fixing communities, but I want specifics." He snapped his fingers once and nodded toward one of his aides off camera. Within seconds, a whiteboard was rolled into view. On it, a detailed mock budget was already sketched in permanent marker. Byron picked up a red dry erase marker with theatrical flair. "You've got a $2.3 billion city budget, like your home city of Dallas. Crime's rising, education is underfunded, infrastructure's crumbling. Now tell me, Ms. Crockett, right now, how do you allocate those funds to fix all three, without raising taxes, without cutting law enforcement, and without running a deficit?" The crowd murmured loudly. Some gasped. One political commentator off stage whispered into his mic, "He's trying the math trap. This is the kind of question that sinks Senate candidates." Byron stepped back, clearly proud of the trap he'd laid. "Tick-tock," he added with a smirk. But Jasmine didn't blink. Instead, she calmly stood and walked up to the whiteboard. She didn't reach for the red marker. She reached into her folder, pulled out a pre-printed spreadsheet, and held it up so the cameras could see. "Mr. Donalds," she said coolly, "that's the difference between playing games and doing your homework. I brought my own numbers." The room jolted to attention. Even the moderator leaned forward. Jasmine clicked a button on her mic and addressed the room directly. "I anticipated you'd bring up budget allocation because that's what people who don't actually fix things always fall back on. They think a spreadsheet makes them look smart. But let's break it down." She pointed to Byron's whiteboard. "First, your numbers are already wrong. The Dallas 2025 budget is $4.6 billion, not 2.3s. That's a 50% error, off the top." Byron stiffened. Jasmine walked to the board and circled the number 2.3B with Byron's own marker. "Strike one," she said. She then pulled a second sheet and placed it under the camera. "Now, where do we cut waste? Start with overlapping contracts, $412 million saved. Next, police overtime abuse, $175 million recovered. Third, legacy, pension overpayments, $89 million. We just freed up nearly $700 million without touching taxes, salaries, or safety." She turned to the audience. "And how do you invest that?" She began writing. Quick, crisp strokes that looked like muscle memory from actual governance. 200 millioners, school renovation and teacher bonuses. 150 millioners, mental health crisis response, teams. 220 million, community workforce programs. 120 million, emergency housing and broadband access. She set the marker down. Balanced, efficient, compassionate. The room exploded. Gasps, cheers. People rose from their seats. Even the moderator clapped involuntarily before catching herself. Byron tried to cut in, voice cracking slightly. Wait, that's not how real budgets... But Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned back to him, her voice ice-cold now. And since we're being real, Byron, you voted against the Community Violence Intervention Act last year, which would have sent $80 million to neighborhoods in your own state. You tried to kill the American Family Stability Act, which would have kept thousands of kids from entering foster care. And you voted twice against public school grant increases while sitting on the Education Committee. The room was now completely hers. Cameras flashed, phones shook, hashtags surged. Jasmine math. Budget battle. Check the receipts. Byron looked stunned, not furious, just exposed. One of his aides frantically scribbled on a notepad. A producer whispered into a headset. The studio lights, once impartial, now seemed to be aimed directly at him. Jasmine slowly walked back to her seat, took a long sip of water, and leaned into the microphone one more time. You tried to box me in with numbers, she said quietly. But I live those numbers. And if you'd ever stepped foot into a broken-down classroom where the ceiling leaks, or met a mother choosing between rent and insulin, you'd know. This isn't a game. It's people's lives. The silence in the room was deafening. And just when everyone thought it was over, Jasmine Crockett dropped a final bombshell. Byron Donalds was no longer leaning forward. He slouched slightly, eyes darting toward the moderator, then toward the camera, then finally to his own notes, as if searching for a parachute mid-fall. His fingers tapped the desk nervously. The swagger that had animated his earlier attacks had vanished. The room, once a silent accomplice to his confidence, had turned on him. I think we're veering off into hypotheticals here, he said, chuckling nervously. That's not how things actually work on the Hill. Budgets are negotiated, not dictated by spreadsheets brought to a TV set. Jasmine didn't even blink. Oh, she replied coolly. So now you're saying the numbers don't matter? Because 15 minutes ago, you brought a whiteboard into a debate like it was an episode of Shark Tank. Laughter erupted from the crowd. Not mockery, but a release of tension. The line hit hard, and Byron knew it. He forced another grin and tried to pivot. Well, look, he said, raising a finger. What people care about is safety, law, and order, not performative budget theater. The American people don't want lectures. They want results. And I've delivered... Delivered what? Jasmine interrupted, her voice rising. Not in volume, but clarity. Another appearance. On Fox News? A viral soundbite that ignores every broken family back home in Florida because you thought it might trend on Truth Social? The audience gasped. Byron blinked hard. And then, he made the mistake. He waved a dismissive hand toward Jasmine. Don't get emotional, Congresswoman. The words hung in the air like a trapdoor creaking open. The room froze. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but her presence did. It sharpened. Focused. I'm not emotional, she said, standing. I'm prepared. That's the difference between a woman who's had to fight for every room she enters and a man who thinks every room was built for him. Applause started in the back rows. Then it moved forward like a wave. One woman stood, then another. People clapped not because it was political theater, but because it felt personal, honest, real. Jasmine turned to the audience now. No one's asking for perfection, but we are asking for honesty. Byron says he delivers results, but what happens when those results mean cutting funding to domestic violence shelters and blocking maternal health bills? Is that the kind of order we want? Byron shifted uncomfortably. That's a mischaracterization. Jasmine cut him off. No, Congressman, it's called a record, and you're welcome to fact-check it. She pulled a third document from her folder and held it up. Your voting history, straight from the Congressional Register. On May 6th, you voted against the Women's Reentry Assistance Act. On June 2nd, you voted against the School Nutrition Expansion Bill. And on July 10th, You skipped the vote on the infrastructure modernization grant that would have sent $140 million to your district. Byron looked down. You talk a lot about what people deserve, Byron, she added. But maybe they deserve a representative who shows up. A hush fell over the room. No laughter now. Just stunned silence, the weight of truth hanging heavy. Byron tried once more to interject. Well, I mean, it's not that simple. There's always context. There are negotiations. Jasmine turned back to him, her voice soft but lethal. You had your context. You had your negotiations. And still, you chose nothing. That's the most dangerous kind of leadership. The audience was no longer neutral. Heads nodded, phones were raised, tweets flew. One popular account posted, Truth Teller 2025, Jasmine Crockett just turned Byron Donalds into a guest on his own argument. Crockett clapped back. Mic drop moment. A commentator in the corner whispered into his earpiece. We're witnessing a political turning point right now. You can feel it. Byron exhaled, long and slow, then adjusted his tie. The moderator spoke hesitantly, trying to regain control. Congressman Donalds, would you like a final word before we move to closing remarks? He looked up, then shook, his head slightly. No, he muttered. I'm good. But the silence wasn't his victory. It was his surrender. And Jasmine, standing tall, eyes locked on the camera lens, spoke one final sentence directly to America. Being loud isn't the same as being right, but the final moment of truth was still to come. Byron Donalds leaned forward one last time, his tone shifting from arrogance to something more desperate. He chuckled, though it was brittle now, like glass about to shatter. Look, he said, scanning the audience for some flicker of support. We can sit here and throw statistics around all day, but let's be real. This is just political theater. It doesn't change anything. It won't feed anyone. It won't fix anything. You and I, Congresswoman, we're just actors in the same broken system. He leaned back, smirking faintly, hoping the faux humility would be his lifeline. So go ahead. Make your viral moment. Win Twitter. None of this matters by tomorrow. A few sympathetic laughs. Not many. Jasmine Crockett stood still. Calm. Unshaken. She didn't scramble to refute his tone. She didn't flinch at the attempt to drag her into cynicism. Instead, she reached down and pulled out something simple. A photo. She held it up for the camera. For Byron. For everyone watching. It was a picture of a young girl, maybe 8 years old, sitting at a folding desk in a run-down public school. Her hair was braided neatly. Her eyes were wide, focused, hopeful. This, Jasmine said, voice steady, is Layla. She placed the photo carefully on the desk. She lives in your district, Byron, 3rd grade student. Loves science, wants to be an engineer. But you voted against the grant that would have upgraded her school's broken heating system. You said it wasn't fiscally responsible. She looked up, straight into the camera. And that's where we're different. To you, this was just a performance, a headline, a game. But to me, it's Layla. It's every child who hears politicians talk about the future, but sees no action in their present. Gasps echoed in the room. Phones came up again. People weren't just watching anymore. They were documenting. Jasmine stepped closer to the center of the stage. You say none of this matters, that it's all theater. But let me ask you something, Congressman. If it really didn't matter, why did you fight so hard to win this debate? Byron opened his mouth and closed it. She didn't wait. You mock activism. You dismiss accountability. But what terrifies you, what terrifies people like you, is that the truth is finally louder than your spin. That someone like me, black, female, unbought, isn't supposed to make it here. And yet, here I am. Not yelling, not throwing insults, just telling the truth. The audience began to rise. One by one. Clapping slowly, then faster, then cheering. It wasn't polite applause. It was cathartic. Byron stared at the floor. Jasmine turned to the audience, her voice rising with conviction. We don't need more politicians pretending to care when the cameras are on. We need leaders who carry the weight of their communities even when no one is watching. She held up Layla's photo again. I'm here for her, And if that makes me an actor in this so-called theater, then I'm damn proud to take center stage." The room exploded. A standing ovation erupted like thunder. People whistled, clapped, cheered. A few cried. Byron didn't move. He simply sat there, motionless, the last fragments of his dominance shattered at his feet. A tweet from a prominent journalist flashed across the screen. "Elena News Now Jasmine Crockett just redefined what leadership looks like." That wasn't a debate, that was a reckoning. Layla deserves better. Crockett dominates. The moderator didn't even try to speak. He knew the debate was over. But just as the applause began to settle, a producer rushed onto the stage and whispered something into the moderator's ear. The moderator blinked, then turned to the camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received breaking news." And that's when the real shock came next. Byron Donalds didn't speak again. He sat quietly while the audience roared. Not with him. At him. There was no final insult, no attempt to reclaim the mic. Just silence. And that silence said everything. When the cameras cut to him once more, his expression had changed. Not the smug grin from earlier, nor the feigned calm from before. Just the hollow look of a man who realized the room no longer belonged to him. Moments later, Byron quietly stood and walked off the stage. No handshake, no closing remarks. Just the soft squeak of dress shoes against the studio floor. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, remained exactly where she had been all along, center stage. She waited for the noise to settle, the crowd to breathe again, before stepping forward to deliver her final message. Not for Byron anymore, but for everyone watching, in that room and across the country. "When I was growing up," she began, voice calm but resolute, "I was told that no matter how smart, how prepared, or how right I was, I'd still have to fight twice as hard to be heard. That's not just a saying. That's a truth too many of us carry every day." She picked up the photo of Layla once more. "And that little girl? She's why I do this. She deserves a world where justice isn't a debate, where truth isn't buried under talking points, and where power doesn't protect the privileged, it protects the people." She glanced toward the empty seat where Byron had been. "There will always be those who think performance can outshine principle. But today, I think we proved something. Intelligence, merit, and truth always rise above arrogance and manipulation." A quiet stillness took over. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the kind of pause that follows a moment you feel more than hear. And then, Jasmine leaned in for one final thought. "So, the question isn't just what happened tonight. The question is, what happens next? What do we do with this truth now that we've seen it exposed? Are we willing to hold our leaders accountable, even when it's uncomfortable? Even when they look like us, sound like us, or promise us everything?" She looked straight into the lens. "If you believe truth still matters, then share this. Not for me. For every Layla out there who's still waiting for someone to stand up." The screen faded to black with a single, powerful line in bold white text. "Do you think justice was served? Let us know in the comments, and if you believe in standing up for truth, share this video." Crockett vs. Donalds. Stand with Layla. Truth doesn't flinch. The battle was over. The truth had won.